it's important, I think, to recognize that this thing that we want to manage comes from good sources, that fear is useful in our lives, that our imagination is essential to us as human beings, and because they are going to have a little negative interaction sometimes, that doesn't mean you want to get rid of either one. Because I think it's easier to manage something that we consider negative in our lives if we don't try to discount it entirely. When we try to do that, we are taking away the advantage of it, and I don't think anybody wants to give up the advantage of it. So it is much better, I think, to acknowledge that this has advantages and that sometimes they get out of our control or they go in a direction we don't want them to. Now, I want to just ask an informational question. When you're approaching, let's just take the audition experience. When you're approaching an audition, and let us say you got home tonight, and there was an email or a call saying, you have an audition on Tuesday. Here's where you go to get the sides. Tuesday at 2 o'clock. How many of you get nervous right away? Right away, okay? A couple of you right away, you start to get nervous. All right, how many of you don't think about it for a while and you get nervous tomorrow, if it were Tuesday at 2? Okay? How many of you don't get nervous until an hour before? You don't, it doesn't worry you, you don't think about it, and then all of a sudden, big time. Love that. Can any of you say that there's been a time it's helped? Do any of you have the experience that it helps? Sometimes? Occasionally? Would you trade? I mean, which would you rather have, the times that it's helped or to be rid of it entirely? Would you give up the times that it's helped to be rid of it entirely?
Yes.
No, Steve would keep it. You'd keep a little of it, right? Would you keep all that you experience?
No.
But you'd keep a little of it. You like a little charge. How many of you agree with Steve? I like a little buzz, but just not, I don't want it to overtake me. Okay, I think that's reasonable. Because the buzz is thrilling, you know? This is one of the things about fear. That, do you all remember the first time that you, some of you will not remember this maybe, but I remember, and it was a long time ago. Do you remember the first time in your life, you were probably 10 or 11 or 12, that you had a response to something that you later realized was sexual? You may not have known it then, but you had that little, you know, you remember this? Your heart started pounding because suddenly something was interesting to you, or you noticed something that you hadn't really noticed before as a child, and the first time that you noticed that thing, or you're aware of that, you know, I remember exactly when it happened to me. Exactly. I was 9. I was 9. And I was visiting my uncle, and there was a copy of Playboy magazine. And I just thought it was a magazine, and then I opened it up, and I had seen breasts before, you know, in like the National Geographic. Remember that? But somehow, in the context that it was presented there, it was not in the jungle. You know, it was in a different context. And suddenly, and I didn't know why it was thrilling, but it was, you know. And then, you know, I realized later in life, I've spent the rest of my sexual life trying to duplicate that. Trying to have that happen again, you know. You want that thing again. So the first time you experienced it was just fearful. It was just like, and then you start. I think that's part of what we get to do about fear in general, is we get to go, part of it is actually thrilling. Part of it actually is stimulating. It's part, and I think that's, again, we get to separate. I don't want it to be overtake me, but a little bit of a buzz, if it makes me a little more alert, if it makes me, that's probably okay. Because I think what we want to do here is moderate and manage. I don't think we want to rid ourselves of it. I think it would probably be a mistake to do that, and to the degree to which any of you feel that it's useful and helpful, I think you should identify how much you like and work out in your head how much you'd like to get rid of. Those of you who would like to get rid of all of it, test that out. More power to you. You can see you can always add back. All right. Tonight is going to be about the letter S. Because for some reason, everything that I have to say about this, in particular reference to how it shows up in auditioning, performing, and interviewing, everything that I want to say to you begins with the letter S, and I kind of like that. It's tidy.
Sam,
Yes.
do you have an extra pen up there?
Someone does. Who has a pen for Curly? Thank you, Johnny. The first thing I want to remind you of is the fear that we have of scrutiny. A good deal of the work I do with actors in performance is based on this. And I personally believe that not nearly enough emphasis is put on it in the training of people to perform. Because the natural supposition is somebody's taking acting class. They like to get up in front of people, right? They are naturally show-offs. That's what the civilians think. And of course, most actors will report to you, no, not at all. Not at all. I'm actually a rather shy person, but in the context of telling a joke or telling a story or playing a character, I like being in front of people, but I don't just like, and then some of us are show-offs and we just love it all the time. But most of us don't like it fully, and yet we do take acting class and we are there. So the assumption is that we don't really need to work on the fact that there's a basic issue about scrutiny because after all, they all showed up for acting class, they must be okay with it. I don't believe that's true at all. One of the primary stimuli for fear is scrutiny. It is in our animal nature, and it demonstrates in all mammals, certainly, that if another creature is looking at you longer than a passing glance, that signals one of two things. They either intend to eat you, or they intend to breed with you. Now, since we can't always count on the latter, we sort of have to assume the former. And this is what animals do. And you will experience it with any creature you're around. That if you hold your glance on it longer than a passing glance, that animal will notice and it will dart, or some animals freeze. Some animals just lock and freeze. But they will have a reaction to the scrutiny. My cat, for example, who sort of lives and wanders around here, many of you have met him, he's fine, he'll do whatever he wants. But you stare at Hershey for 30 seconds and he's zoom right out of the room because he assumes that something bad's going to happen. And cats like to stare more than most other animals. But stare at him any longer than he's comfortable with, and he assumes something as bad is going to happen, even though, for example, he knows me, he knows something's going to happen for me. But if I stare at him, he knows something's up, and his nature kicks in, and he scurries. Hi, how are you? There's one right up there. We have exactly the same reflex. We don't, however, dive under the couch because we can't fit. So what human beings do is they do a much more sophisticated version of either freezing or darting under the couch, and that is that we get phony, or we forget our lines, or we do whatever it is that'll diffuse that. Now, if it's another creature we're comfortable with, if our boyfriend or our girlfriend is staring at us, we know it's now the other one. They don't want to eat us, the other one. But or a person at a party that keeps looking, you know how that is at a party when somebody is kind of looking at you too much and you go, ooh, I hope this is because they think I'm cute, because if it's not that, this really creeps me out, that, and you can't, until you decide whether you think they're attractive and it's about attraction, you're just like, don't keep looking at me, that whole thing. Guys, you have stared at a girl for a little too long and she's finally said something like, would you fucking put your eyes back in your head? They get upset, they don't like that because it's threatening.